Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly 90-minute deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
My name is Lisa. I'm a clinical psychologist and a college counselor. I am a parent of a boy in elementary school, a girl in middle school, and a girl in college. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University.
This week in the news, edX acquired by educational company TU, proceeds to be invested in a nonprofit. An article by Nate Herpich of the Harvard Gazette. Our question from a listener is, what are 3-2 engineering programs? When do you apply? Mark goes over the pros and cons of 3-2 programs. Our interview was with Eric Furda, the former executive director of undergraduate admissions of Columbia University and the former dean of undergraduate admissions for the University of Pennsylvania. And it's a Q&A about applying to selected universities. This is part 2 of 3. And our college spotlight comes to you from Spokane, Washington. Or is that Spokane?
It's Spokane. Spokane, yeah.
Gonzaga. Spokane.
Awesome. And Dave is back after dropping Lauren off at Yale. He survived. And if he ever struggles, he's got a 30-minute free counseling session from Lisa on how to handle your kid being away that went live on episode 188.
It's the relaunch, launch 2.0. We got the little birdie out of our nest back into the little nest called college. So it was a happy time. It was a little sadness for us. And I know my daughter tried to pretend that she was sad to see us go, but I know she was excited to get back to college.
Chomping at the bit to get out of there. Come on, you know how that is.
She was so happy to see her friends. So
awesome. Several announcements today. First of all, I mentioned a while ago that if an interviewee ever touched you, take 5 minutes of your time and email them. It'll make their day. And someone, at least one person did it, maybe a lot more, I don't know. But I had one of the interviewees that I interviewed on the podcast reach out to me and say just that. Mark, one of your listeners sent me the most touching email, and it literally made my day. And so I just want to underscore that again. It'll take 5 minutes of your time, but it'll make somebody's day. And if you don't know, you can just Google the name of the person, their email. If you don't see it, just shoot us an email, questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Ask for their email. I'll be happy to send you any emails. As long as you don't hate on them. You can't be hating on them in the email. I'll send you the email as long as you're going to have some good positive plaudits for them. Special thanks to our listeners who have completed our survey. We are learning so much. We're learning what you like. We're learning what you don't like. There's definitely going to be some things we're going to be able to implement as a result of this feedback. Sometime down the road, I'll share a few of the amazing insights that we want to incorporate into the podcast. But in order to incentivize people, I want to offer something, which is an audio file. It'll be a recording with a real detailed breakdown of all of the results. If you want to know everything from how many episodes people listen to, or how many people listen to the podcast, where they're from, what their education is, what the main things they like, what they don't like, I'm going to provide a real detailed breakdown by audio file. Now, we don't ask for people's names. I don't know anybody's name. It's confidential, but I do have emails. So I'll just send it out to anyone who has an email record. And if that's of interest to you, it'll be a little bit of an incentive. Now, I want to run this thing through the end of the year. And so, don't expect that in your inbox next week. We're talking early January. We'll tabulate the results and send that off. I really want us to get 150 responses. That would be a fantastic sample size. And once again, I'll share this with anybody we interview, and everyone we've always shared it with in the past has said, wow, this is a gold mine. Now I know who your listeners are, and that helps me prepare. Also, I mentioned this before, but I really want to underscore it. So we have 3 different people that will be coming on over the next 6 months onto the podcast for interviews. And it's not going to be one of those interviews where it's just me asking my questions. It's going to be me asking your questions. So I want to remind you what these three topics are so that you can send your questions to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. So we've got an interview coming up on athletic recruiting, anything to do with athletic recruiting and college admissions. That's a hot topic. We haven't covered it that much on the podcast. So I want to address it by having an expert come in. So please send any college athletic recruiting questions you have, sports and college, any of that stuff. That's one topic. Second, Kevin, who's a partner I work with, will be coming in to talk about international admissions for people who are considering going overseas. He's an expert in this area. And if you've got any questions about overseas schools, going overseas, please send your questions in and we'll get them on there. And the third thing, and thanks to Keisha who sent this request in, everything money. That's really important. So I actually decided to add a second guest. So that'll be two experts I'll be interviewing that have worked at about 6 schools between the two of them. And any questions you have about how money works at college, whether it's scholarships, grants, loans, work study, net price calculator. I mean, nothing's off limits. You send your money in, send the hard questions in, and we'll get the money questions. We'll get like 6 or 8 questions on and bang them out. By the way, one great thing about the questionnaire is that a lot of you guys are sharing, you're putting your questions in there. And so it's given us a whole bank of questions for a listener off the questionnaires. I mean, the surveys. I keep confusing questionnaire and survey. So, in fact, there's so many questions, Dave, that we're going to have to go to a few sort of rapid fire question from a listener segments. Instead of just doing one, Lisa and I are going to have to do 3 at a time. Otherwise, what's going to happen is, I'm going to reach out to someone and say, hey, we're answering your question. They're going to be like, dude, that was 18 months ago. I'm in college now, And so we don't want to answer people's question like 15 months after they sent it in. So we will be doing some rapid fire. We take on like 3 at a time just to get caught up so that we can be a little bit more responsive to you. And the last thing I want to say is thank you so much for being a listener to Your College Bound Kid. It's a highlight of my week, every week to come on here and meet with you guys. And I just thank you for your time because the most valuable thing in life you have is your time. And if you're investing your time with us, I think you deserve a thank you for that. And by the way, I'll be in Raleigh from the 13th to the 16th of September. Maybe one thing I like as much as coming on this podcast is meeting podcast listeners. So if you're there and you'd like to meet me, I'll do my best to accommodate that while on my trip. So those are announcements, Dave. You ready for me to transition?
Let's do it.
All right. So as I promised last week when I gave the admissions tip, I said I was going to do a couple weeks in a row addressing this Y essay. And you'll have to go back and listen to what I shared last week if you never heard that. It's very, very, very common. Why Syracuse? Why Notre Dame? Why Caltech? You name their school. And that's a common essay.
Tip. That's right.
Yeah, you liked my tip last time.
Yeah, just think of the question that only applies to that school you are applying to. Don't say, I like the fact that you're close to fast food restaurants.
Exactly. That's what I get. Yep, Dave, good memory from last week. So last week I mentioned the generalist, the person that says, gee, I like that you're in the city, I like that you're not that far from home, whatever. That's just not cutting it. What I've noticed in the last couple of years is people have been upping their game. There's a lot of workshops, seminars, things out there that say you gotta tell them something about like the classes that they offer. So people now are listening, I'm interested in this class or that class, or I want to study under this professor or that professor. This is an upgrade, okay? It's better. It's more specific, but there's still a problem with this. And I'm going to give you a little secret about the Y essay. The Y essay is not about them. It's about you. They already know who their professors are. They already know what courses they offer. They want to know about you. That's the little secret, so I had to whisper it. So what do? Does that mean that you don't mention the professors or you don't mention the courses? Because I'm seeing more and more of my students, they just bounce around. They mention 6 courses. I want to take this course and that course and that course. Okay, what they want is reflection. Reflection. What do I mean by reflection? Share why you want to take the course. That's the gold. Share why you want to study under the professor. Say why you want to go on that particular study abroad or participate in that internship program that they have. That's when you take your essay. If you're starting out with that general stuff, you're in the city, you've got a good sports program, I like your size, that general stuff. That's like, honestly, like DC level. Okay. Then you get up into mentioning specifics. Now you're into the B level. But now when you add reflection, now we're talking about A. Now you get the grade of A. So that's my tip. It was long, but hopefully it was helpful. Was that clear, Dave?
It is. It's like you're heading towards a destination in life, and you want to answer the question, how will this college get me there? And so you're talking about the wheels of the car that you think will get you from point A to point B. That's what the college wants to know. How can we help you on your journey?
Yeah, you're right. Because what happens with these, and I'm getting a lot of them where they just bounce around. I want to take this class and that class and this. They almost read like a website. They read like a something, in a formal publication. They don't have that personal touch, and so you want to get it off of that sort of staid, formalistic kind of writing and just personalize it and bring it home. Just remember the tip: the YSA is not about them. They already know them. It's about you, and you'll be fine. All right, Dave. Admissions vernacular.
Let's do it. I know Lisa got the last week, so I got to keep up.
She sure did.
Them.
I thought I could stump her, but she did the Dave deduction tactics.
She did.
And you got the one before, so will it be 3 in a row? Here we go. The word of the day, lifer. Lifer. What would a lifer be?
I think it's when a person has spent all his life at one institution. So if
bingo! You got it. So this is very common, particularly for private schools that have K-12. If you're in a traditional public school setting, a lot of times you have a public elementary, then you go to a public middle, you go to public high school. But there are a lot of private schools. Some are high schools only, some are middle and high, but there's a lot of K-12s. And so the student's been at the same school for 14 years, and the term is, this kid's a lifer. Good job, Dave. All right, big number. The big number is 37. And you say, that's not a really big number. Well, maybe you'll think it is now. 37% of students transfer at least once, according to the National Clearinghouse. That's more than 1 in 3. So a lot of times there's good reasons for this. Sometimes there's not. Some people, they just bounce around because the stats are surprisingly disturbing, Dave. How many people transfer a second time? That number's a little disturbing. But from my experience, most of the people that transfer are happy that they transferred. But try to get it right the first time. Try not to be the 1 in 3 or more than 1 in 3 that ends up having to transfer.
So how many do they? Twice?
Oh, you know what? I should have brought that number in, but I had it at the tip of my head. We did an episode on this way, way, way back in the day. But of people that transfer, it's like around 1 in 5. So that do it a second time. So that to me is pretty high. You know what it reminds me of? You didn't get the marriage right, so you try for the second one, and then you realize, the second one wasn't any better, so you go for the third. I don't know if that's a good example, but it's what popped in my head.
Yeah, it's probably a poor prognosticator in terms of your stickability in life.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I need to stay out of the marriage illustration, so that might not have been a good one. But all right, Dave, we got a hot topic. Let's talk about it.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
All right. This topic, Harvard and MIT are going to lead a nonprofit to tackle long-standing inequities in education. And they're going to do this because edX is going to be acquired by the educational technology company TU. And the proceeds from that acquisition are going to be invested in a nonprofit headed up by Harvard and MIT. So here's a quick summary, Mark, and we'll dive right into it. Harvard and MIT announced that edX will be converted to a public benefit entity that is fully owned and operated by the company TU. TU will then use its resources to grow its online platform. And the proceeds of this acquisition will be used by a nonprofit led by Harvard and MIT that will focus on closing the learning and opportunity gap of under-resourced communities. And this article is basically a Q&A with two of the principals involved, Alan Garber, who's the provost of Harvard and a co-chair of the board of directors of edX, and Bharat Anand, the vice provost of Harvard, who's also an edX board member. So let's first start off, what is edX? edX is a company that was started in 2012 by Harvard and MIT, and it was part of the MOOC movement, that stands for Massive Open Online Course Movement, whose mission was to make courses from the world's best universities available to all with an internet access. Now, edX has just blown up. How big is edX right now? Well, currently it has 2,800 courses. It partners with over 194 universities, and over 39 million learners worldwide has participated in its courses. And edX has boomed during the pandemic. So you might ask, why do they feel they need a mission for the under-resourced? Well, according to these two principles, during this time, the economic disparities and social inequities that plague our world has, quote, continued to expand. So currently, a large fraction of edX courses are participants who already have college degrees. But the new company hopes to expand access by using the new company to, number one, invest in new platforms and marketing, and number two, collaborate with the nonprofit with MIT. And this nonprofit has three objectives: to maximize the impact of online learning everywhere, especially with under-resourced communities; to partner with organizations, especially community colleges, that serve these under-resourced communities; and to develop next-generation learning platforms with broader focus on all learners, not just college-educated ones. And so I'm going to close with a quote before we open up for discussion. According to Alan Garber, quote, "We need to transform adult education and lifelong learning for a broad swath of learners who are being passed by forces such as globalization and technological innovation, and that the nonprofit will support research to learn more about the barriers that disadvantaged communities face in being able to take full advantage of online learning platforms, barriers such as language, bandwidth, and cultural biases in educational design." So that's a brief summary, Mark, and let's see where we want to take this discussion.
Hey, you came back from Yale, freshman. That was great stuff. A plus plus plus. So good stuff. So I think it might be helpful to say just a bit about TU first, because who's this TU that's taking over? So TU's a powerhouse. It was founded 13 years ago by the same people that founded Princeton Review. And it's an educational technological company that's got over $300 million of revenue and over 5,500 employees. So TU was originally founded to try to get some of the elite organization colleges in the country to offer online courses because they weren't doing it. So a lot of your elite colleges use TU's platform now to offer online courses and graduate degrees as well. And so basically what's happening is if you go back and you look at around 2014, 13, 14, 15, there were really like two big names when it came to online courses. It was like Coursera and edX. And over time, Coursera started taking more and more market share as they made more and more investments. And basically, Harvard and MIT, they just sort of felt like, look, this thing has kind of grown outside of our capacity to scale it to the level it needs to go, especially after like interest during the pandemic just blossomed and interest in the homeschool movement. People in the homeschool movement, they just feast off of these courses that are offered. You literally can take these, courses from college professors. And, one thing that I think is really good, Dave, so oftentimes ego gets in the way of people accomplishing great things. I just think it's great like that MIT and Harvard have been able to partner together. And it's not just this. You're talking about two world-class universities, both in Boston. They partner together and allow for cross-collaboration of courses as well. At MIT, you can take Harvard classes at MIT. And here they've gotten together. And this is, to me, nothing but a good story all the way around, right? Like you're democratizing education. You're providing education to the masses. You're recognizing that we are in a technological age and technology is truly disrupting education. And you're saying, what can I do to facilitate that, to get great content and great knowledge into the eyes and hands of as many people as possible at a really, really affordable price. You know, we always talk about how expensive college is and learning. Here's an antidote to that, you know, and I've always said, I know you agree with this, Dave, because you and I talk all the time, education is not just your college degree. Education is a lifelong pursuit. You're getting educated now hopefully you are, at least as you by listening to podcasts. It's the books you read. It's the YouTube videos you watch. It's the seminars. It's the workshops. And it's the people that you meet who mentor you and you listen to. And it's taking courses online through avenues like this. And what I really think is great, one of the challenges you have when you provide something educational like an edX or a Coursera, or quite honestly, our podcast, is the people who are most likely to seek it out are people who are already educated. They just are. And God bless them for doing that, for taking advantage of every resource that's available to them. I respect them highly. I do it myself. I don't have a doctorate degree like Dave and Lisa, but I do have 2 master's degrees. And I'm seeking out education everywhere that I can. So God bless those who are educated that seek to be more educated. But you have to respect what edX is doing with Harvard and MIT and saying, you know what? We've looked at our study. A higher percentage of people that are taking advantage of this are already educated. That's great. But what could we really do to target under-resourced people more? And they literally put that into their contract. If you're going to buy this, these are some things that you need to put in place. And that's what they've done. So they're partnering with community colleges. How many times are community colleges under-supported, Dave? And what an invaluable resource. So I think that's phenomenal. And I know they'll be reaching out to organizations like KIPP and NCAN and Jack and Cook and so many other organizations that prioritize working with under-resourced students. And so I just think it's a win-win. But one of the things I think our listeners should know is, and how it relates to them, because maybe you're thinking, well, how's this relate to me? The way it relates to you is online education and opportunities are only going to get better. Yes. Part of the deal here is that 2U has the staff, the resources, the technology to take edX and just scale it to a whole different kind of level. And while, there's going to be a focus on under-resourced, it's going to be available to everybody. And so keep an eye on the offerings and keep an eye on this, because online is just going to get better and better and better and better. So those are my thoughts. Dave, any closing thoughts from you?
Well, I think that we had a brief discussion yesterday, I believe, that what China is doing. And this is
we did.
A needed response to keep us competitive on a global level. China, which has the ability to make broad institutional policy just by national fiat, has essentially really taken steps to democratize education, often to the expense of our stock market portfolio, unfortunately. But bottom line,
mine more than yours, man. You dumped yours for real estate.
That's right. But it's really trying to essentially make online education for free and expand access to all its society to get them a baseline level of education to make them globally competitive. And we know during the pandemic that the institution that really took a hit in terms of enrollment was community colleges, the very institutions that actually serve most of our underrepresented communities. And so I think this is a private industry response to a failure of our national policy to really address the inequities of education, and I applaud it.
Awesome.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Lisa, we're back to our countdown, our endowment countdown. I know we took the numbers from 100 down to 80. So this week we're looking at schools 79 through 70. And for those people who are wondering what I'm talking about, we're looking at the colleges that have the highest endowment per student, which is the way you need to measure endowment. And it's a way of looking at the wealth of the school. One way, one metric. You have to look at this plus net tuition revenue. Those two things combined give you a really good picture of the financial health of the school. at least in shorthand. All right, so here we go. 69, Rush University in Chicago. I've never visited Rush. What do you know about Rush University in Chicago?
Well, my understanding of Rush, and I think it might be affiliated with the University of Illinois at Chicago because they're in the same area, is it's like a medical and nursing school. So I worked with residents who were doing their medical school at Rush, and also nursing students. And it's a great hospital. Rush is known for neuroscience.
Sounds smart. Sounds like smart people.
It's a smart people school for sure.
Yeah. When I hear neuroscience, that's what I think of. Something I wouldn't have been good at. This one surprised me. 68, University of Tulsa in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So the last two have $290,000 per student. And then 67 is Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. Now we're into the $300,000 per student. And then at 66, Colgate University in Hamilton, New York. Once again, in that 300,000 range. At 65, Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio. And Oberlin, now we're into the 310,000 range per student. 64, Lafayette College in Easton, PA. 320,000. Then DePauw, not DePaul, but DePauw in Greencastle, Indiana. 63rd with 320,000 per student. Now we're up to the 330,000 range. 62, Macalester College, St. Paul, Minnesota. Great school. 61, Mount Holyoke College. These are all fantastic schools. 330,000. And coming in 60th, another great school, Colorado College, Colorado Springs, Colorado, at the 340,000. So we're into the top 60.
All right.
We're in the top 60 home next week. Well, not next week. 10 more next week.
That would be the whole podcast, right? Just talking about those 60 schools.
It'd be the whole podcast, and we'd have like one listener left by the time we finished. It's okay to handle 10, but after that, I think it's a snooze job. Well, Lisa, I'm very, very excited about this question, so take it away.
Right. Well, this is a question from an anonymous mom, and she says, "Hello there. I'm really enjoying your podcast. The format is great, and it's pretty amazing, the content and the guests you have on the program. Our son loves computer science and programming, but also is a voracious reader of literature, history, and pretty much everything. We've only recently learned about 3+2 programs where a student could do a few years at a liberal arts college and then finish up at a university for computer science. Have you done an episode on this topic? If not, we'd be interested in hearing more. If you can couple that with a discussion of the schools that participate, seems like Dartmouth and Columbia team up a lot, that would be great. Also, I can't tell if students apply as incoming freshmen or have to apply once they get into the liberal arts school. For example, if a student gets into, say, USC for computer science, as well as a great liberal arts college, but won't know if they can get into a companion engineering program if they're supposed to apply as a rising sophomore, then it seems kind of risky to go to the liberal arts college.
I love this question because we've never taken on 3-2s, Lisa. We haven't. I don't even really, I may have alluded to them a few times, but I know we didn't do a question on them.
No.
So let's talk about them. And what I'm going to do is describe what they are, and then I'm going to go over the pros and the cons of the 3-2 program. So a 3-2 program, engineering program, is a 5-year dual degree program. So students spend 3 years at the liberal arts school, and then they spend 2 years at the engineering school, and they end up graduating and getting 2 degrees. They get a liberal arts degree, and they get an engineering degree. Now, you'll also see 4-2 programs sometimes. And most typically when you see a 4-2 program, a student is getting a bachelor's degree and then they're getting the master's degree at the second institution. So you'll see 3-2 programs, more common, and then you'll also see 4-2 programs. And these liberal arts schools, they pair up with universities. Most of the time, they're pretty brand name universities. And I'll share with you sort of some of the biggest ones, the most common ones that you'll see here in a second, and sort of the pros and cons. So there are 2 of them that are really, really big. And I mean big as in they have over 100 different liberal arts partnerships. And you see them all the time. I'd be reading stuff I'm like, you again? Constantly. You know, and those are Columbia University in New York and WashU in St. Louis. Those are the 2 big, huge ones. But there are a lot of other pretty large ones. Those two have over 100 liberal arts partnerships. Some other really big ones, Case Western Reserve, they have around 60. Rensselaer Polytech, they have close to 50. And then Georgia Tech and Dartmouth, they have around 20. I think in the question they mentioned Columbia and Dartmouth, didn't they, in the question? Yeah. But then there's others. There's quite a few more than that. Caltech's got a program. Penn State's got a program. Illinois, Champaign-Urbana's got a program. University of Michigan's got a program. Vanderbilt, Carnegie Mellon, WPI, Worcester Polytech, Johns Hopkins, and George Washington, just to name a few of the more popular programs that you'll see out there. So let's talk about the pros. You know, I work with a lot of people that say, I want to be an engineer, but I've also got a lot of interest in some other thing. And it could be anything. It could be art history. It could be political science. Or it could be physics. I mean, so many different things. And so one of the pros is that somebody can do a deep dive into this other area of interest that they have, this area of passion, and they can still end up getting their engineering degree. And so that's one of the pros. Another is usually these liberal arts and science schools, they're small supportive communities. So you're moving into an environment where you're going to build really close relationships, friendships for life, hopefully. You're usually in a residential community, plenty of access to professors. And so there's a richness there, not only in terms of developing your problem-solving skills and your communication skills, but your friendships. And a lot of times it's harder to fall through the cracks in that kind of supportive environment. And so that's a great way to start out your early part of your education when you're transitioning right out of high school. Another advantage is you're more mature when you're actually jumping into your engineering classes. Now you're probably a 21-year-old, and you've learned how to transition and learned how to study, and so you're more mature. And then another advantage is that a lot of these engineering schools, they really do love these students. They love these dual degree programs because they find that they get a different type of thinker than just the traditional engineer curriculum student. In fact, some of them refer to them as liberally educated engineers, that have strong communication skills, strong problem solving skills, a broad background in social sciences and humanities. And then when they combine that with the technical education, it's really good. So a lot of times you will find that the background you have is highly respected and really well welcomed by the receiving institutions because they appreciate that background, that training that you've had. So those are the pros. Having said that, in most instances, the cons, in my opinion, outweigh the pros. I used to be a really big proponent of these programs, Lisa, and what changed my mind to making me go from these are great to they're great in the right situation. That's a different nuance, but an important one. Believe it or not, it was conversations that I had with colleges, not the engineering schools, but the liberal arts schools. And my big concern really boils down to one thing. You want to guess what it is?
Admissibility into the engineering school?
So that's a broad way of putting it. The way I would put it is, maybe I say that's a narrow way of putting it. The broad way I would put it is just not that many people actually end up matriculating. Mm-hmm. They just don't. And so a lot of times it's well-intentioned, but it doesn't actually result in what it looks like on paper. Wow, I can go off and get this liberal arts and science degree and get my small, personal, residential community and my access to professors and grow, get maturity and get this other area of passion I want to pursue and come in as an engineer and have the writing, the thinking, the communication of all. It sounds great. But I had multiple colleges at these liberal arts schools tell me, Mark, I'll be honest with you, not that many people just end up at those places. They just don't. And I just think you need to be aware of that. So let's talk about some of the reasons why that happens. Because if you read the writing on these programs, Elisa, they're written like it's a guarantee. There's you'd go do this, do that, and you're guaranteed a spot. Well, here's where it falls through the cracks. One, most of them are very selective, okay? That's part of the appeal to the student coming out, is all those schools I named are all very prestigious institutions, right? And so that's part of the appeal to the student. Wow, I can go to this liberal arts science school and then I can end up at that institution. That's pretty attractive. So by being most selective, they can have a high barrier to entry. They can have a high GPA that they expect you to get. And there's very specific classes that you need to take. And a lot of times, if you're not getting good counseling, you can mess up by not fulfilling the necessary courses that they expect you to take, or the GPA. Those two things knock a lot of people out. The GPA and taking the necessary prerequisite courses. Another big deal is that if you're at a liberal arts and science school, and these schools don't have their size usually in the scope to offer full-blown engineering. Of course, there's exceptions. So there's a good half dozen or so liberal arts and science schools that do have very good engineering, but most don't, because it takes, a tremendous amount of resources for smaller institutions. You're just not in a culture where you're around people who are aspiring to be engineers. And so just that alone can, unless you come in very determined, this is what you want to do, you're more likely to be around people that are interested in lots of things. Medicine, yes. Law, yes. Education, yes. Accounting, on and on and on. All kinds of different things, but not really many people aspiring to be an engineer. So that can end up being a deterrent when you're not around that community, and then you're trying to go in that direction. Another thing is that extra year or two can be cost prohibitive. You're now talking about 5 or a 6 year plan. That's a lot more cost. Now, in fairness, I will say this. Some of those schools I mentioned, the Johns Hopkins of the world and the Columbias and the Dartmouths, they don't offer any merit aid. So there are instances where actually it's a good financial move. You might get merit aid at your undergraduate institution and save considerably on what you would have paid if you went to the 4-year school that gives no merit aid. So it's sometimes the cost is going to be more with the extra year or two, and sometimes it's not. That's case by case. Another factor is people don't want to leave their friends. Mm-hmm. So you get hooked in, and these are your friends, and now I'm attached, and now I'm going to leave all my friends in my community. So for all of those reasons, not that many people just actually end up at the finish line. And one of the things I love on the WashU website, you can go and look on the WashU website. They have an excellent section about their partnership and how it works, and they share data. And so on the website, they mentioned that we have over 100 partnerships, and it lists the liberal arts and science schools that they have partnerships with. And they say these 100 plus schools result in 300 students enrolling in this program. So do the math. Lisa, you can do that one.
That seems like there's not that many from each school going.
Yeah. So an average of 3. So there you see it. It's, not that many people are ending up in these programs. So now I was just talking to one of our not talking physically, but email correspondence with one of our podcast listeners who's absolutely got a masterful plan to execute this. And there's no doubt in my mind that she, her child will do it. And some schools, I think, do a better job at creating pathways. Georgia Tech does an incredible job, and that's the school that they're interested in going to. But if you go in, you have to go in like committed to this. Mm-hmm. It's very, very important that you go in committed to it. And one of the things that's really important is that you access the advising system. So there's advising on the receiving school, and there should be advising on the sending school for these dual degree programs. And you really want to make sure you're talking to the advisor, and you're making sure you're taking all the right courses and you're following the plan, because a lot of people don't do that. Now, who wins? The selective universities definitely win because, first of all, they get all the marketing to those students. Their name dangled in front of them like you could end up here with a degree here, and there's no loss to them if you don't end up there. I mean, they get an incredible marketing opportunity just to get their name out there. Then they get an incredible applicant pool.
Right.
So they definitely benefit. Like if I'm a university, I'm trying to strike one of these deals up with somebody. Mm-hmm. And so, so it absolutely benefits them. They get a great talent pool. They get their name out there. And all I want to say is if you're interested in doing this, you really want to stay in absolute close consultation with your your dual degree advisor and make sure you're following the plan to the T. So those are my thoughts. There's some pros, there's some cons. I'm not against it for everybody, but I've just seen too many people that start out and don't make it to the finish line, so that those, it works for people that are real serious about this and they've got a plan. They're not going to be deterred by, I'm not going to leave my friends, or I'm not around any engineers, so now I want to do business, or I want to do social sciences or humanities, or, education or something. What are your thoughts, Lisa?
Well, I think, it takes a really unusual, special person to be good at both the liberal arts and like the hard sciences and math and engineering. And I could certainly see how a program like this could seem like it's very appealing to those types of people, and why industry would want those types of people. Like, so many times I feel like people get one or the other, like the soft skills or the writing or the math, but they don't get both. And if you've got all three, then you are going to be great at whatever you do. But I think something like this is going to take a lot of self-knowledge and a lot of maturity to be able to pull off. There's too many opportunities to get derailed. I was just thinking, like, some of the schools that you've done spotlights on that are more technical, like Rose-Hulman comes to mind. Like, they have a lot of liberal arts classes, and really encourage that at a lot of these engineering schools. So that might be another thing to consider, is to go for an engineering school that really invests and values the liberal arts as well, within their program.
Yeah, and another one is Babson. So Babson's got the BOW Consortium. And so you can take your engineering courses at Olin, right there. And then you can go to Wellesley and get your liberal arts.
Right.
So you get your business at Babson, get your liberal arts at Wellesley, and get your engineering at Olin. And I do want to say something on a positive side. Like, I look at, like, Georgia Tech does a really, really good job. I see what they do to cultivate this. They have a partnership with Spelman and Morehouse. I've known multiple people that have gone to Spelman and Morehouse for 3 years and then gone on to Georgia Tech, and have partnerships with other schools like University of North Georgia and many, many others. And so when a school does a really good job with their communication and their advising, it makes a really, really big difference.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to say too is sometimes you have to be a little careful with the fine print. So while the schools can say, if you have this GPA, like a 3.3 GPA, you're automatically admitted. Anytime the schools also request teacher recommendations, that is not a guarantee that just your GPA is going to get you in, because now you're introducing other holistic factors into the equation. But I think I'm coming off a little more negative than I want to. I do think these can be great opportunities. It just has to be somebody who really is really intent to stay on that path and is not going to get derailed by all the factors I mentioned, such as you don't really have much of an engineering community, and now you've got close friendships, and not everybody wants to like uproot and leave that.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go. Oh, one thing I never answered, there was a question about when do you apply?
Right.
Yeah. And so applications are typically submitted during the winter of a student's junior year or senior year to an affiliated institution. So this is not, so yeah. So in the question, it said it seems a little risky to apply not knowing if you're getting in. Yeah, you're not going to know when you're coming out of high school if you're getting in.
Oh, I see.
This is not like a BSMD
so it's
program.
not like they're waiting for you. They've got your spot all guaranteed and waiting for you to finish up at the liberal arts college. You apply during that tenure at your liberal arts college, and maybe you get in and maybe you don't.
Yeah, you have to go and crank out that GPA at that school. And one of the things, these really selective prestigious colleges, they've built partnerships with really good academic schools. It's not always that easy to go in and get that particular GPA and take all those courses. A lot of times I find it can get derailed on the courses. Like if you don't take the right physics classes or whatever, the right sequencing, you're either not going to make it or you might have to stay a little bit longer to get those courses in.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping people don't hear me as saying that this is a bad thing. I'm just saying, like, you got to really have a plan and stick to your plan.
Right.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa.
Oh, my pleasure.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
All right, friends. Hopefully you enjoyed the interview with Eric Furda. First of all, we talked about his book, and then we transitioned to talking about applications to highly selective schools. We're in part 2 of a 3-parter with Eric. In this part, Eric answers several questions about institutional priorities. What are they? And he gives an ingenious way for listeners to know what a school's institutional priorities are. That's a little tease, but he has a very insightful way of finding out what a school's institutional priorities are. You're not going to want to miss that. And then we talk about teacher recommendations, and Eric gives his advice to any teacher listening, what they should focus on when they write a teacher recommendation. Talks about what we look for on the other side. We also talk about AP scores. What is a good score? What score should a student submit versus not submit? And we stay on the topic of test scores. And Eric also talks about when a student should submit their SAT and ACT. How should they know? Should I submit or not submit if they're applying to a particular school? Part 2 of 3. Listen and enjoy.
Let's talk about institutional priorities. Oftentimes students are baffled, or parents are baffled. They can't believe that, this kid who was number 3 in his class and he had 1570 on the SAT and blah, 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 blah. He didn't get in. And then this other kid who was like number 18 got in, whatever. And it's really perplexing to them. Let's not assume. I mean, we do define these things a lot on our podcast, but we always have new listeners. So why don't we, first of all, define institutional priorities and then talk about how that shapes admissions decisions from an enrollment management standpoint, especially at a selective school?
Well, the first piece that comes to mind for families is what's frustrating is this is not predictable. Mm-hmm. And, input these 2 variables, GPA, test score, courses, grades, test scores, and then what is the output? While there are still some schools, usually at the state level, that will try to give some framing of where decisions are made. And of course, there's always going to be something on the edge.
Right. But for holistic admission, it's you can't nail it down. And that people want to be able to nail it down. They want that predictability. I'm glad you started with that.
They want the predictability. And so I think that is what's most frustrating and also can make people angry. And that's where lawsuits are happening at every level, from the private to the government level. And so I think that's one piece of it. So what do I do about it? And that's where I think Jacques and I, usually we want to be practical about this. I mean, we could sit here and be upset about a lot of things while, okay, well, what do I do with it? And so I'll give you an example of what you do with it and define institutional priorities. Take a look at the press releases. Usually families will only see this as if they pick up the student newspaper around the time that decisions were released. Mm-hmm. So see when the decisions were released at any college that you were interested in from last year, for families that are rising seniors right now, last year, and see what the press release has to say. And again, whether you agree with it or not, try to see and place yourself within this, not to make the decisions more predictable or maybe even more likable from your standpoint, but at least it's going to give you some perspective on it. And so that press release may say, of our incoming class, X number are going to participate in our 30 plus, on our 30 plus teams at the Division I level, whatever it is. This percent, there'll be some geographic breakdown. There'll be a gender breakdown. Okay, so if I'm a young man applying to a school and they say they just admitted 2,000 students and half of them are men and half of them are women, it's like, okay, well, 1,000 of those spots, I'm probably not seeing myself in. Right. And of course, there's fluidity there, and I want to recognize that as well, and that may be reported out. You'll see first generation college. The student who's going to be the first in their family to go to a 4-year college and complete a 4-year college degree. Pell Grant recipients, you're going to be seeing increases there at many institutions. Students who are U.S. based and identify as members of a minority group, and what do those checks look like? Mm-hmm. X% as international students. And again, I'm not saying this from is this a zero-sum game? And if I'm not here, then it's my spot. It's nobody's spot. You're speaking to what the composition of the class is, because that's who you're going to learn from later on as well. And hopefully you feel that way and understand that. But the point that you're making here is, okay, now I see what the admit rate is. I see how many applications they have. We talked about yield. But this has given me a much better sense of really what the shape of that class looks like. And I may see myself intersecting in a couple of those areas right there.
Right.
And in others, I may feel like, no, I'm not fitting into what is being reported out. But then they're also going to say the academic component of it, whether that's through some type of grade point average, standing in class, or test scores. Maybe one other resource I brought up, what I was just discussing, was basically looking at the press releases that are written but rarely read, quite honestly. The student newspaper will pick it up, the local newspaper will pick it up.
College Kickstart does a good job of providing links to all of that. They've almost become the new Jack Steinberg blog in that role. That's where I go to get them all quickly versus go to 100 schools.
Hands down. If you go to College Kickstart, and George Fan is absolutely amazing, his work, on the right-hand side of that blog is, with admit rate, is they're going to show what the press releases are. If you want to do a little bit more digging and have a little bit more, granularity, is you can go as a family to prior year common data set.
Yeah, that's great too, and to compare.
And so the data's there. You just have to dig a bit more deeply.
That's such a helpful answer, and I think it can help people to have more realistic expectations, because one of the biggest challenges I find is unrealistic expectations. Nobody's fault. They just don't have a sense at the highly selective schools that the demand exceeds the supply of spots, and wrapping it around your mind that there's almost 44,000 high schools, international students, of which some schools are 15% plus, and then recruited athletes. Okay, that may not get reported out, but that at some schools could be 30% on some small schools.
Yeah. And you can figure it out. You can just go to the rosters. So if they're not reporting it, just go to the rosters.
There you go. It can help people to, I think, have realistic expectations, which is an important part of my job in managing the process, so that people are not dejected and deflated. And I want kids to feel great. And it also gives you an opportunity to start talking about other schools.
That's right.
That they can fall in love with and begin to celebrate them. If you fixate all your time on your plan E, boy, you can miss some great plan Bs and plan Cs. And so I love this suggestion of having a family go look at the press release and see, do I line up with that? Alumni is another one that could be in there, right? They could list the number of alumni.
That's right. The legacy number would be in there.
Yeah. And so you can say, no, I'm not that. I'm not international. I'm not Pell. I'm not first gen. I'm not, from these unique states or countries. I'm not an underrepresented student of color. Doesn't mean there's not a spot for me, because chances are you may still be overrepresented percentage wise, but the numbers, if a school admits 2,000, or if they enroll a class of 2,000, it really, really gets slim when you start, like you said, gender alone knocks half off.
That's right. And, given that we've mentioned College Kickstart, this next interface is a bit clunkier, but boy, it's powerful. It's called College Navigator. So it's a bit clunkier. I can say that because, I love it. It builds off of government databases.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, as an example, you could put in admit rate ranges saying, 30% to 60%.
Yeah.
With the criteria that you're still interested in, and just making sure that you're maybe giving yourself a bit more of a chance based on that one metric.
Yeah, I don't think there's a student I work with. I don't go to that website. That's just one of my go-tos. That's awesome. That's great. Fantastic stuff. Let's transition a little bit and just get your feedback on some other things. So, I can't even imagine how many teacher recommendations you've read, Eric, at Columbia and at Penn. Talk about the type of things that are in a teacher recommendation that really make a student stand out at the most selective colleges versus something that's maybe very, very typical. It may be really good, but it may not make someone stand out in the most competitive pools.
Well, first, hats off to the teachers. Some who had the kind of the opportunity to have smaller caseloads, just like college counselors do, just based on the size of the enrollment of the school, to those that are writing letters for so many students because they teach that junior advanced level class, right? There are some teachers who have a disproportionate responsibility on their shoulder. So hats off to those students. And I love reading comments that are written over like at Penn Charter after the third quarter, and just getting some teacher perspective on the students that I advise. And that is my simple pieces of advice are keep it in the lane of that classroom. Now, you may know of an extenuating circumstance that you want to lift up because it is something that has impacted or made you even more proud of a student's achievement, knowing something about that young person. And that could even be just like how far away they live from the school. I mean, there could be any number of factors. So I'm not saying completely forget everything else, but the main focus here is that student learning in your classroom, how they manage learning the material, how they, and I think this is really an important point, how they interact with the other students in the class. Maybe there's an opportunity there that they are working directly with the student through lab assignments or some other project that the students are grouped together. And that's not to say that you're just the student who constantly raises their hand, because there are introverts in classes too. And then what do they provide? But it's that dynamic, because that's the class that we're admitting. Our faculty want to know what the students are going to be like in the classroom. And so keep it to the content of the class, the interactions with their classmates, and their interactions with you as a teacher. One final piece would be that self-advocacy piece, because it's really important, as we know in college, that students will have their that they will advocate for themselves, because they're going to need help, they're going to need support, and just how they recognize that and then reach out for that support.
No, I love it. That's great.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
All right. Well, we're having Lisa back to back on recommended resources. I'm really excited about this. So she told me about this. It's a resource called Corsava, and now I use it with all of my students. And why don't you just explain what it is, Lisa? But I love it, and I thank you for telling me about it.
Well, Corsava is a really creative idea of how to get students to tell themselves, to tell their advisors, to tell their parents what they value in colleges and what they don't. And it's done through a card sort. And so basically, when you do a card sort kind of assessment, you're going to get a pile of cards. In this case, they're virtual cards, like on an iPad or your computer. And you're going to sort them into, love it, like it, hate it, don't care, right? So, and you just do it very quickly. So there might be things in terms of the college, like I want a green campus. I want a campus that is pretty. I want an urban campus, and all these different characteristics of colleges. And so rather than asking the person to tell you explicitly what they want through their conscious thought, you're getting their unconscious and emotional reactions to these cards. And that way you can really get a great picture of how they really feel about college and what they're really looking for. And it's like super fast. Corsava, I think most students can do in 10 or 15 minutes, and they like it. It's fun for them to do. And it brings up characteristics that they haven't necessarily thought of on their own about colleges that they didn't even know they could even consider. And it's just, I think it's a phenomenal tool to really get at sort of the preferences that are underlying what students want.
Yeah, because after you answer all this and it goes in and it sort of shows your must-haves versus your it would be nice to haves, versus it's irrelevant, and it's fun too. And so I've incorporated it into the testing I do with all of my students now. One of the many tests I have them look at, and I find the students enjoy it. So check out Corsava.
Yeah, my kids like to do it all the time. Like even my 9-year-old will do it occasionally. So I'm getting a whole data set. Yeah. Well,
you're breeding a good new future group of psychologists. Because
I don't know.
I reached out to Corsava because I wanted to know what's the earliest I could admit. Because I have an account like you do. We both have accounts, and I wanted to know what's the earliest that I could administer it to someone. And they told me that students need to be 13, sort of for legal reasons.
Right. Well, this isn't official stuff, but I could see that for legal reasons. But, what a 9-year-old is going to want in college is probably going to be different. I can give it to him again when he's 17 and you're going to see a difference in what he's looking for probably. But
is this the Thomas that knows he wants to go to Ireland?
Yeah. And he wants to be a statistician.
Gee, he's got his life figured out.
That's because he wants to take these career tests. And so I gave him one and that's what it said he should be. So he's like, all right, cool. That's what I'm doing.
Awesome.
But I love card sorts as a psychologist. We occasionally do card sorts and neuropsych testing and other research measures, but they're my favorite measure because they're just a quick, dirty measure of what the person thinks and likes and what they do.
Oh, so you come in with like card sort experience. That's like part of the tools in the toolkit.
Yeah, I am. I'm a big fan of the card sort. Always have been.
Good stuff. Well, check out Corsava. It's just Corsava.
Let's talk a little bit about AP scores. What advice do you give to a student if they get a bad score? Do you recommend that they don't share that because you're not obligated to, right? You don't have to list a low score. Would you recommend that they just list their higher scores? What do you see as high scores at the most selective institutions?
There's always going to be some context to any score.
Of course.
And so I do think that that's important without having rigid cutoffs. I think the answer that is typical and I'm still comfortable with in some ways is the general answer would be 3 and above. And I think we could see that. So, okay, the College Board is saying that that's college bearing. However, if you're talking about specific schools and you're seeing that in that department, you're only getting credit if it's a 5, you may then think about, okay, am I tailoring this a little bit? Am I tailoring my advice to students, and should students and families tailor that advice? Here's the point, though, I want to make about any score, grade, any score or grade. And that is, even if it may seem lower, that 3, as an example, could give another level of confidence that you will be able to take on the work at that school. It may not mean that you're placing out of a level or getting credit, but quite often, we're just talking about first generation families and students who are coming into a high school setting for the first time from their middle school, and now they're coming into this other environment. Is, that score of even a 3 could give some level of confidence. The 1 and the 2, I'm still not completely comfortable with. I'm not going to go out there, and maybe someone else will.
And I think when the 3, would you say that different people have different perspectives on that? And I'll tell you why I say that. I had a conversation with an admission officer at a competitor to Penn or Columbia, and I asked them about a student that had multiple 3s on a transcript, and if he would recommend they include them or exclude them. And, and his answer to me was, I wouldn't say this in front of the group, but for our school, I would not submit them.
And it wouldn't surprise me if from the faculty through those departments that 4 or 5, or we don't believe that this test is a reflection of how well they'll do in our class. And so we're not giving credit for even the 5.
Right.
So I completely understand that. And, again, there's just like, where are there times where maybe that will help? And maybe it's student context, maybe it's school context, being the secondary school, and there's certainly, the higher ed or college or university context.
Now, this is sort of a similar kind of question, and it's one I'm sure you get a lot in this test optional world. Should I submit my scores? Should I not? And, the conventional wisdom you'll hear is take a look at the score range and ask yourself if you're at the midpoint. If you're at the midpoint, submit. If you're not, go test optional. But then this I can say because it wasn't told in confidence. I had a conversation with Yale about this, and I said, well, what about the nuance? And they said, listen, if I get a 31 out of Appalachia, I'm doing a cartwheel. That might be the strongest score that I see in 5 years coming out of that place. And I agree. So there's nuance there. So how do you, what advice, and just for context, the 31 would be below the midpoint at Yale. So that's why that point was brought up, right? So how do you advise somebody, because this is something almost everybody is wrestling with, to submit or not submit, because it's something that can be done on a school by school basis. So knowing what you know sort of from the admission side, what advice do you bring to the placement side on when do you submit and when do you not?
Yeah, the answer I've been giving for this period of time is, look at that middle 50% range. And if you're comfortably near that 75th percentile, maybe even going a bit further down, it's, you submit the score. And then there were some ranges, which, for a number of the places that we're talking about could be in the mid 1400s. And I'm like, okay, you're not really helping them, but you're not hurting them, in terms of because we're talking objectively about these score reported ranges. Over a period of time, and it's really only been this last month or so. And yes, there's quite often some context to what the background that the student has. Again, we're talking about first gen and socioeconomic, perhaps athletes as well. My response is, when do you want to fill that vacuum? Because what are they going to assume otherwise? And, with a student in the high 1300s, I said, you know what, let's submit that score. It was more through an athletic survey, quite honestly, because I don't want them to assume something else. And I think that's where we're operating right now. And I do feel that my colleagues, and when I was in the seat, we operate in a certain way, and we mean what we say with our policies, and I'll stand behind those policies of being test optional. If a place says test blind or test free, they're saying something else to you too.
True.
My response is, when do we want to take uncertainty off the table by submitting the score? And that's kind of the lens that I'm bringing right now, outside of where I felt like I had some hard and fast with the middle 50%.
And that's what you said about the 75th percent. You mentioned something about the 75th percentile. You were talking about the 75th, not the 25th, right? So whether you're in the upper quarter versus the bottom quarter, did you just repeat that point? Because I missed it.
No, certainly. I think you can feel comfortable when you're in that upper quarter, and I think that's fairly straightforward if you're scoring in the quarter. But what's interesting is sometimes that 75th percentile could actually go all the way down to the median score. Like, I think the last class that I was involved with, a 35 was, yes, the 75th percentile on ACT, but it was also the 50th percentile.
Yeah, exactly.
So, how do you calibrate all of that? But I do think for any student, because this is really about thinking about how can a student and a family make this decision, is take a look at everything that you're presenting and taking a look at this one score. How does it fit into this larger picture? And do I feel that there's greater upside versus downside? And sometimes that downside is simply just, again, taking uncertainty off the table. If I submit a score, they can't surmise anything else. Like,
yeah,
do they take it? Do they not take it? Do they submit it? Do they not? So I think in some ways I'm trying to calibrate a little bit more about where some of that flexibility can be, because we want to take uncertainty off the table on the part of the admission officer.
I'm glad you put it that way, because it's something I've been thinking about a lot more recently as well, because what we're seeing is if a school, especially in this COVID world, if a school's only getting, let's just keep it real simple, 50% are submitting, it's skewing these averages really, really high.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the admission office has to know, is obviously, that, well, these numbers are skewed really, really high, and some of the students that aren't submitting could easily come in here fully capable of doing our program. And so, one thing I'm not as sure of is how conscious are they about bringing those averages down versus protecting the profile, as we say, versus no, we want those averages high because of all of the benefits that come to that, whether it's increased yield, people being willing to pay more, because they value our degree more, and, all of the different ramifications that come from why people would rather have high scores than low scores. And people feel a certain amount of score pressure as enrollment managers.
Well, those pressures are there. And I think the first question that needs to be answered is, what have we learned during these years about student preparation with the data that we have in front of us? And are we able to have some level of confidence about preparation absent these scores, and what are those variables? So we were talking a little bit before about yield and enrollment management and institutional research and the future of higher ed. So what's being learned right now, and what should be adjusted based on those experiences?
Would it be fair to say, though, Eric, that when you look back in your roles, like if your score averages went down from the preceding year, like somebody's not going to be happy with that?
Absolutely. Some people are not going to be happy with that, maybe including yourself, while you have to get to the why. And, there's certainly reasons why scores can become inflated over certain years and, why they would then not continue with that pattern. And so, getting underneath it, there's a skewed sample now of who's submitting scores. They're going to go up for a period of time. And then we have to see what comes out of these other 2 or 3 years where, what the policies are going to be for the schools, and including the California system, which is, certainly a large driver of higher ed in this country.
Sure.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Lisa, Gonzaga University today. You ready?
Yeah, I'm excited to learn more about Gonzaga.
Well, this was a really fun one for me to really do a deep dive into. And it's definitely a school that is very much elevated in my mind as a school that I'm definitely going to be putting on a lot more lists than I was putting on before. So let's dive right in. So some of the things that jump out at you about Gonzaga: very tight-knit community that's very friendly, very supportive environment, mostly discussion-based classes, not lecture. Lots and lots of school spirit and school pride. And it's got both the sports school spirit, the basketball crazed nature of the fan base that unites the community. I call it the Duke of the West. That's my name for it. And I say that,
Wow,
no, I say that
high
because
praise.
if you look, no, but if you look at Duke's history, like Duke was a reputable school in the 50s and 60s. But Duke really got on the map when, Coach Krzyzewski got there, Eugene Banks, the late 70s, the last 40 years, by being an absolute basketball power. And same is true for Georgetown. Like, Georgetown was a good academic school in the 50s and 60s, but it really was under John Thompson, Patrick Ewing, Alonzo Mourning, that whole era of being a basketball powerhouse that took Georgetown to the next level. And that's exactly the blueprint that Gonzaga has followed. It really has been a basketball power now for 20 straight years, and it's stronger now it's right now consistently top 3, 4, 5 every year. And so it's got the sports spirit, but it's also got the school pride. So they've got 13 varsity sports. They play in the West Coast Conference. Basketball reigns supreme. Football, no football program. Football was discontinued in 1941, and no looking back. And all the games are free. But it's routine for students to camp out in tents.
Wow.
For days, actually, to get their tickets to the basketball games. And you might think, who wants to be in a tent? This is actually something that they love as part of their tradition. They look forward to it because, their nickname is the Bulldogs. And so the nickname for where they actually play in McCarthy Stadium, but the nickname for McCarthy Stadium is the Kennel. Because Bulldogs Kennel, and so it's just called the Kennel. And so it's a small place compared to your Big Ten venues, right? Like, there's 6,000 seats that it holds, and they allocate 1,200 for students. So counting graduate students, like, they're up to 7,500 students, and a lot of people go to Gonzaga partially because they want to be in that electric environment. So you do the math, 7,500, 1,200, you better camp out to get your tickets. But it's also a place that combines a city life with the Pacific Northwest love of nature, right? So you're in Spokane. You've got access to skiing, which is big. You've got hiking. You've got kayaking. You've got rock climbing. All that stuff, students get involved in. You've got very popular intramural sports of spike ball and frisbee. So it's got that whole Pacific Northwest Colorado nature vibe about it. And then another thing, of course, it's a Jesuit school. I love Jesuit schools, even though I'm not Jesuit or Catholic. I do. And like a Jesuit school, it's got the same imprint you'll see at other Jesuit schools. Strong commitment to social justice, strong commitment to developing mind, body, soul, strong commitment to service as a lifestyle, volunteering, and they just bequeath to their grads and their students this principle, this outlook, this prism through which they see the world that says life is not about me, myself, and I. You know, it's about being a difference maker. It's about being a change agent. It's about making the world a better place. So, for example, they have over 50 service-based learning courses, and hundreds of students take trips, service-based trips over the breaks. It's a school that doesn't have Greek life, and that's intentional. You know, we've gone back and forth on the pros and cons of Greek life. One of the arguments against Greek life is that it can balkanize a community and divide a community, and then the people just sort of hang out in their own sorority fraternity. They've sort of take that perspective. And so they're really into the whole unified whole student body, not sort of creating divisions. And, you know, I mean, I'm not anti-fraternity, but I also respect that view. So some of the things they really emphasize are students helping other students and creating this supportive community. In fact, they have this saying on campus that says, Zags help Zags. And in fact, they even created a whole program called Zags Help Zags. And it's a program within the community that's designed, you would like this, Lisa, to promote well-being, like mental health, preventing physical, mental, or emotional harm. Like if you see one of your students struggling, you know, you confidentially reach out to the Zags Help Zags program. And while the nickname technically is the Bulldogs, you'll hear it sometimes referred to as GU for Gonzaga University, and often just as the Zags. And so it's got an interesting tradition historically. It was founded in 1887 by an Italian father named Joseph Cataldo with a mission to educate American Indians. And he was passionate about that. And he reached out to the officials in Spokane to see if they would help him with funding. And the officials offered generous funding if he would make the school a whites-only school. But that was not his calling, and so he bucked their money and went on with his mission. So originally had a historical commitment to reach the American Indians. Lots of spiritual retreats. They do 16 spiritual retreats a year, but once again, like a lot of Jesuit schools, no requirement for students to attend Mass or any chapel. So, you know, you'll see evidence of the Jesuit values that just sort of imbue the whole culture of the school. But like a lot of Jesuit schools, there's not the commitment to sort of proselytizing. It's a beautiful, picturesque campus. It's in a residential community, but it's only 1.5 miles from downtown. It's about a 15-minute walk. It's on 152 acres, 105 buildings, beautiful brick and gorgeous trees. I mean, it's a really pretty campus, and they've made a lot of upgrades in their facilities as well recently. Lisa, you'll like this. They have a 4-year university core. They've got a core.
I love me some core classes.
You do. Here, University of Chicago, they've got to you. They converted you. Mm-hmm. They got to you. That's probably the one thing. I respect cores, but I'm more of an open curriculum person. Let me take what I want to take. But I do respect cores because every graduate comes away with sort of a foundation and a common belief set. And so, and I highly respect them. I just think that I like open curriculums, but I think it's great when, you know, that's what's great about American education. There's lots of choices out there.
I mean, I totally get what you're saying. I just think that, like, you don't know what you don't know. And if you just
That's
only
true.
go towards things that you know about or you think you're interested in, and you're not forced to study other things, then you don't realize all the other things that you could be interested in or good at or hate or whatever. But, you know, like, you're exposed to them.
Not only that, but perspective. So, you know, I think our last, one of the spotlights we did recently when we did College of Charleston, you know, I opened up about a friend of mine from Michigan State who's like a hardcore Trump MAGA guy and how we really don't see things the same way, but I've kind of learned some things from him. And I've often thought, like, if he just would have had more sociology and political science, you know, but he was just a hardcore techie. Like, he was all about like engineering, computer science, and just was taking those kinds of courses. And so sometimes when I see things like that, it does make me think, you know, that's the advantage of having like more of a balanced, I mean, getting exposure to, and I've had lots of people I've thought, man, some sociology would just allow you to see the world so differently. So,
right.
Not to say that I have a perfect perspective. I'm not trying to make it sound like I'm all that.
I'm pretty sure it's darn close, Mark. But, I think you're right. I mean, there's strengths to being a specialist, and I suppose for every person it's different. But I do think that getting exposed to different ideas, different cultures, and learning how to evaluate them critically makes for better citizens, quite honestly.
I hear you. And you've been exposed to it, so I have to respect that. So let's talk a little bit about the core. So it's a 4-year cohesive program of study. It's anchored at its core by the question, as students of a Catholic, Jesuit, and humanistic university, how do we educate ourselves to become women and men for a more just and humane global community? So it's so Jesuit, right? Mm-hmm. It's just what you would expect. And so that's sort of the basic question they attempt to answer. And that's like undergirds all 4 years. And so they try to cultivate reflective, responsible individuals, like I said, rooted in the Jesuit Catholic humanistic tradition, who have the skills, habits of the mind, knowledge, and spirituality to enable them to grow through service and promotion of justice. So they have these 4 different themes. So year 1, they call it understanding and creating. So it's how do we pursue knowledge and how do we cultivate understanding? And so in that year, students examine the question through courses that deal with curiosity and intellectual engagement. And the first year courses include things like a first year writing seminar, a focus on reasoning, communication and speech, scientific inquiry, and math. And then in year 2, they look at being and becoming. Who are we? What does it mean to be a human? And so the second and third years, they explore themes and questions related to philosophy and religious studies, including philosophy of human nature and Christianity and Catholic traditions. And then in year 3, they focus on caring and doing. And so the big thing they're looking at there is what principles characterize a well-lived life. And so here they're looking at things like ethics and world religions, comparative religions. And then it culminates in year 4 where they call it examining the possible. What is our role in the world? And so there they have like this core integration seminar that sort of integrates the principles of Jesuit education. Prior components they've taught in the first 3 years of the core, and there's extensive writing requirement. So that's kind of the overview. And so I feel like when you look at Gonzaga, while there's not an attempt to proselytize, you do need to sort of believe in and like the Jesuit philosophy or the Jesuit values, or it's probably just going to feel like just too religious for you, for a lot of people. It is 50% Catholic and therefore 50% non-Catholic. And so I like it because I'm not Catholic, but I respect a lot of the Jesuit views and the Jesuit values. But if you're I work with some families, especially when I'm working with a lot of Jewish families as well as Islamic families, they don't really want to see much Catholic or Christian at all. I think this would be too much for them. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I don't want to overgeneralize because I guarantee they have both Jewish and Islamic students on campus. I'm just saying the majority of the ones I work with. Mm-hmm. You have to be sort of comfortable with, because you are going to hear a lot of the language and the terminology, and you're going to see the St. Aloysius and St. Ignatius and the buildings and the this, and you know what I mean? But they don't jam it down your throat, in terms of philosophy. So I'm just going to hit on a couple of things I haven't touched on and then ask you, what your thoughts are, so far. And then we'll get into stats. But I have a lot of stats. It's a big stat day today. Lots of stats.
All right.
So some of the things that are really cool, they've got this really cool regional partnership with University of Washington, which is pretty cool. They've got a fantastic leadership studies school. It's mostly on the graduate level, but they offer some really unique opportunities on the undergraduate level as well. They've got some excellent, well-kept facilities. They've really made a lot of upgrades to the facilities. The basketball has just given them a national and international profile. It's hard to pay for that amount of marketing. I mean, they're literally on national TV every single week from November through March right now. That billions and billions of dollars to get that kind of publicity. And they're playing the Dukes and the North Carolinas and the UCLAs and the Michigan States. I mean, they're playing the top programs in the country, constantly on national TV. And so that's really led to like alumni donations have come in, other donations, fundraising's been sky high. They've been able to raise tuition, and they've really made some big investments in their facilities. And one of the places they've made a really big investment is in their arts program. So they've got a brand new state-of-the-art performing arts center, went up in 2019, and they've really made massive investments in the visual arts as well. Also some big improvements to the Jepson Center for Business. The most famous alumni, Bing Crosby, attended in the 20s. So you'll see Bing Crosby's name splatter all over some of the buildings there. One of the real popular clubs is the Gonzaga Outdoors Club. It reminds me almost like the outing club at Dartmouth. And so they do all kinds of outdoor activities, which is pretty cool. One of the really nice things about the school is its location. So they're located in the University District, which is right along the Spokane River. And it's like, I'm a sucker for water, Lisa. You give me water, like even our neighborhood we live in here, it's called the Lakes. There's like 6 lakes. That's what got us. Those lakes sold us on buying it here. Michigan State's got the Red Cedar River. That got me when I visited. And they've got the Spokane River right there. It's really beautiful. So it runs right through that. You've got the Cardong Bridge that goes right over the river. And they're part of the Centennial Trail, which is 37-mile trail of biking paths that goes right along the river and goes right into parts of Idaho.
Wow.
So it's beautiful. And so they're only 8 miles from the Spokane airport. So they're really close. And a little bit about Spokane. I mean, Spokane is the second largest city in Washington, obviously Seattle being the biggest. It's 4 hours east of Seattle. And it's got a metro population of 450,000. A city population about half that. So it's a decent sized city. Like this isn't like a little 30, 40,000 little town, you know? And so it's a good sized city. You know, a few more things. The mission of the school, I think, says a lot about the school. So I'll just read the first part. Gonzaga University is an exemplary learning community that educates students for lives of leadership and service for the common good. And I think that explains just what they're trying to inculcate. Is they're trying to, and in admissions, by the way, a little admissions tip, because they do holistic admissions. They're looking for difference makers. They're looking for people that are going to change the world. And so that's one of the things that makes them pop. Known for excellent internships, tapping into the city of Spokane. They do have a residential requirement. Students have to live on campus for 2 years, the first 2 years. And that really forms a bond. That's just kind of a glue that sort of cements the students together. They're known for having a real zealous alumni base. They continue to support each other once they get out into the real world. And when you look at their college, they have 7 colleges altogether, 5 undergraduate. And so they're organized by those colleges. So you have the College of Arts and Sciences, the School of Business Administration, the School of Education, the School of Engineering and Applied Science, and the School of Nursing and Human Physiology. Those are really the 5 undergraduate schools. They do have 2 grad schools as well. They've got a law school that's over 100 years old. It's been around for a really long time. 1912 actually was when it started. And then their leadership studies is like a real marquee program, but that's really more on the grad school level. Let me just kind of go over a few more things here, and then I'll ask for some feedback. So their most popular employers for business students are Deloitte, Boeing, Moss Adams, DocuSign, and Vanguard. And I'll tell you the most popular majors. So it's business and psychology. Now, this is based on number of degrees. Mechanical engineering, accounting, biology, nursing, sociology, computer science, exercise physiology, and civil engineering. They offer 4 types of engineering. So they've got civil, they've got computer, they've got mechanical, and they've got electrical. And most people regard their top 3 programs as being business, engineering, and nursing as their top 3 programs. And they're especially known for accounting. And so, you may remember I kicked out this little niche survey the other day, like what one word best describes your school. And so I looked that up, and this says a lot about them because this answer that best described the school, 80% of people gave it. So that's like the highest number I've seen. And the answer was motivated and friendly.
Nice.
So that says a lot. And this is another really high number. It's one of the highest numbers I've seen. 85% of the students gave the professors really high marks when it comes to being dedicated to teaching. So that's another thing they're known for. Small classes, teachers who really care, teachers who get to know you, no TAs. This is I was going to save this for stats, but I'll throw it out now. Only 2% of classes have more than 50 students. So it's like, average class size 22. And here's another interesting thing from that niche poll. 62% of students said varsity sports are a very big part of campus life. So that's just a bit of an overview for now. I've got a lot more to say, but what are your thoughts so far?
Well, one of the things that really strikes me is you've got a school that really has an emphasis on community and building a community. And as it says in their mission statement, to be working for the common good. And you have this commitment to service, but you also have a lot of people who are going into professions.
You do.
And of course, I think the nursing school, probably that's an easy fit. But, to have accountants who are interested in the common good and service, that's quite something. And to really engineers,
Yep.
because that kind of combination of skill sets and interests, that is what changes the world.
Yeah. And one thing that I always get excited about is I love to see mid-size and small schools that offer like robust business and engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times to get that, you do have to go to like your Big 10 schools or your ACC or your really large institutions, your Big 12, your Pac-12, your really large institutions. They're the ones that are known for the business and the engineering. But let me jump into the stats here. So the total enrollment is 7548. That's grad and undergrad in professional schools. Undergrad is 5222, most recent numbers. So you're talking about a school a little more than 5,000, but yet a robust business program, robust engineering, and nursing. They've got all the liberal arts and sciences, but they also have the professional degrees. And I think that's pretty awesome. A few more stats. 47% male, 52% female, 1% non-binary. 51% of students live on campus. As far as racial ethnic diversity, 72% white, 6.9% Latino. 10.9% Latino, 6.9% multiracial, 5.8% Asian, only 1.2% Black African American. There's a lot of chatter on the message boards about how the school's not diverse and this, that, the other. But my view, you have to look at schools through the context of where they're located and their demographics. Spokane is a pretty Caucasian place. And so, So I personally cut them some slack on that. But it is one of the biggest complaints from students about the school. And they've got some nice initiatives they're putting in place more recently. And they're only 1.4% international, too. So they're not bringing much international diversity, although they do have, like you see with a lot of schools in the state of Washington, special relationship with Southeast Asia. So they've got sort of partnerships with Vietnam, Indonesia, and Malaysia. But I'd like to see them become more than 1.4% international and 1.2% Black. That'd be an area that I see they could really beef it up. They are, one thing that's nice about them, a lot of times students, especially if they're going to go a long ways away, they want to know they're not going to be a suitcase school. It just completely empties out. And they're 47% in-state. They're 53% out-of-state. But 83% of school students are coming over 200 miles away. So this is a place where people are like relocating to go there. This is not a commuter school at all, at all. Okay, their median unweighted GPA is a 3.82, but once again, I like to look more at the middle 50%. The middle 50% is a 3.6 to a 3.98 weighted, and really, I shouldn't even say weighted because unweighted. The problem with weighted is so many weighted scales. So forget that. Let's look at unweighted. Unweighted is a 3.55 to a 3.91. So I would encourage somebody not to get intimidated by that 3.82. Look at it this way. 25% of students have under a 3.55. So, you might be a competitive applicant with a 3.2 or a 3.3 if you have the other things that they're looking for, and they really do look for evidence that you've been a change agent and that you're a good citizen and that you'll kind of do well in the context of community. As far as test optional, they've made a commitment, was a recent commitment when the pandemic broke, but they made the commitment that they are test optional in perpetuity. So they're not kind of just doing the test optional thing for like a year or two and letting the virus pass. And I love it when schools are consistent with their test optional. So their test optional extends to all merit scholarships. It also extends to their honors program. And, I should have said this before. I like direct admit programs, Lisa.
Yes.
Their nursing is a direct admit, and so is their engineering. And so test optional extends to direct admit nursing and direct admit engineering as well. So they're really not sort of talking out of both sides of their mouth, like we're test optional, wink, wink, but send test scores and you got the inside track for scholarships and honors college. They're not playing that game, which is kind of nice. Middle 50% test scores, 1,200 to 1,330. 26 to 30 on the ACT. But you know what, Lisa? I'm increasingly almost starting to feel like Ed Fisk and the Fisk Guide, they made the decision to not show test scores anymore. Because when you're test optional, it's so skewed, because you're only showing the scores of a represented sample.
Right. Well, you're only showing the highest scores because those are the only people who submit.
Correct. Now, I have been looking more closely at that data, like how many submit. And so in the case of Gonzaga, 71% submitted scores last year for the SAT, and the number was in the 40s for the ACT. So sometimes I'll look at schools and they're getting under 50% of submitters. And to me, throw out the test scores then, because they just all they do is intimidate people that don't have the scores and make them think that they can't get in the place. Acceptance rate, 65.5. It kind of goes in that back and forth between 63 to 70 in that range. So it's a competitive school, but if you look at Jesuit schools on the West Coast, it's not as selective as Santa Clara. It's probably a little more selective than San Francisco, and not quite as selective as LMU, Loyola Marymount. So those are just West Coast really well-known Jesuit schools, so that's why I picked those for comparison. They've got a December 1st admission application date. That's for priority, and then they'll still go to rolling after that. The average salary for graduates is $52,000, which is pretty good coming out, and 98% of students get some kind of money. So most people are getting merit or need based. Now the cost of attendance is $64,800. Of course, that's, everything all in. Breaks down about $47,000 on tuition and fees, room and board around $13,000, books and supplies around $1,200, and then all the other expenses, everything about $3,800. But they like to point out that the average freshman's aid package is $33,600. And I looked it up, and the average 37% of students that have no financial need get merit money. And the average award is just a tad under $17,000. So, I encourage people not to be intimidated by the sticker price if they're like, there's no way I can do that. A few other things that might be of interest to people: 75 different fields of study, 26 masters, 2 doctorates, faculty is 466 people. 87% have terminal degrees. They've got some really good outcome data, which is very impressive. So the 4-year graduation rate across the country, national average is like using that 41, 42, 43 rate for 4-year. Gonzaga is at 80% for their 4-year rate.
That's pretty awesome.
It is. Student retention goes between 94 and 95, which is really good. So basically 19 out of every 20 freshmen are returning. And 94% of students were employed within 6 months or graduate school. And they actually just do really, really well in sort of outcome data. So if you look at LinkedIn, it says, according to LinkedIn, their top 10 employers, Gonzaga University, and normally the university is the biggest employer for every school, by the way. Second, Boeing. Third, Microsoft. Fourth, Amazon. U.S. Army. Fifth. Oh, by the way, they have a very strong ROTC program, too, by the way. Very strong. Providence Health and Services is next, then Spokane Public Schools, then Nordstrom, University of Washington, and Nike. So those are their top 10 employers. 56% of students go abroad, study abroad, and they've got their own campus in Italy. And it's supposed to be like a transformational experience. A lot of people say that was the best experience they ever had, was going over to Italy, studying at the Gonzaga campus over there, which is pretty amazing. 85% 6-year graduation rate. So those are the things. Those are, I'd say, are the main things. Anything else you want to comment on?
Where do I sign up to go to this fantastic school? No, it sounds amazing.
It's so something you say this because I love doing the spotlights. They excite me. This is a school I was looking at and I was thinking I would love to go here. And the reason why that's so amazing is because like diversity is like one of my biggest things. It's kind of like a deal breaker. But I'm like, I can make an exception for this place. I'm serious.
It's in their heart. It's just not in their numbers, right?
Yeah, I really, because I just, there's so many things I love about this school. And I love how they support each other. And I never really got into sort of the alumni network. Like the alumni really look out for each other. I think the campus is gorgeous. And I respect I respect their values, even that I'm not Catholic. And so it's a school I'm really, really impressed with. Mm-hmm. And I've been starting to put it more and more on students' lists, but I'm going to be putting it even more on students' lists after really doing a deep dive and preparing for this.
Yeah. Now, what do we know about Spokane? I don't know a ton about it. I did have one of my classmates in graduate school. She and her husband were from Spokane, and they spoke of it in mixed terms. But, that was a very long time ago.
Yeah. What did you hear as the pros and cons?
Well, I think at that time, and you have to often remember how old I am, but.
Listen, you're younger than Dave and I, okay? You're like the spring chicken of three of us. Dave's got me too by 9 months, by the way. But anyway.
They said it was kind of like flat and it snowed a lot and it was hot and it was super conservative at that time. But we're talking, 25 years ago. So I have no idea what it's like now.
It's very outdoorsy. It's not as progressive as Seattle, but it's more progressive than so many parts of the country.
True.
So many parts of the country. And I think one thing that's really nice about this school is it can blend that really nice campus that a lot of students like with the quad and the greenery and the buildings that look traditional Ivy sort of look, the brick. It combines that, but yet you've got access to the city. You're 1.5 miles from downtown. So a lot of students like if they're not in the city, want to be close to it. But it's in a residential neighborhood, but yet it also still offers all like the beautiful aspects of nature, the nature piece with the water and the hiking and the backpacking and the kayaking and the mountain climbing and skiing. And so it kind of gives you the best of all of that,
Right.
And it also, this is largely due to sports in its last 20 years. It's a name people have heard of. Like a lot of people, don't want to go to a school nobody's heard of. People have heard of Gonzaga. And I've, followed basketball really closely. I mean, the powerhouse program they're building, I don't see it stopping anytime soon because it's actually been 3 coaches consecutively that have done well. And Mark Few, he's turned multi-millions down to go anywhere else. He's like, why would I leave any place when it's so amazing here and I can go fishing all the time?
Right.
So I think it's a high quality of life out there. I think I'm a fan.
Yeah. And I have to say that my classmate and her husband did move back to Spokane after their time in Chicago. I don't think they were that fond of Chicago either, to be honest with you. And I do think there is something really to having that balance of having access to nature. I mean, just having moved to North Carolina, we're doing a lot more things in nature. We have a kayak now. We go hiking.
Oh, good for you. I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. We actually just got another kayak. So it's happening.
2 of them.
Yeah.
You're hardcore.
Well, what happened
Where do you go?
Well, there's some lakes really close to us. There's Lake Jordan, and then there's rivers. There's a bunch of rivers. We're just beginner kayakers, but it was my husband, my son, Thomas, and me in a kayak. And after that trip, I just told my husband, I really love going kayaking with you, but I don't want to go kayaking in the same kayak as you ever again. And so, another purchase was made. So, but my point is that
so you can have your own kayak.
Yeah. My point is that it's really great to be able to do urban things and then be able to do things in nature. And, we were in Chicago. like we couldn't go just kayak for a couple hours or hike for a couple hours. It would be like an expedition, it'd be harder. It was more effort. Not that you couldn't do those things. They just weren't as common. And I think that does make for a really good quality of life.
Now, one thing I do get, and I get this a lot from the students I work with in the Pacific Northwest, they just feel like it just rains a lot out there. And they a lot of times are like, I need a different kind of climate. And they live there. I looked up their data and didn't look too atypical. Like there's 106 days on average of precipitation. That includes rain, snow, sleet in the average place in the country. And Spokane has 115 days. So, I don't know what that, to me, that's not that bad. Average place in the country gets 27.8 inches of snow in the course of the year, and they get 43.9 inches. And so, I think that's really more other parts of Washington as far as the rain, because their rainfall numbers are they're not that high compared to other places.
Wasn't it like the mountains, right? They're like a rain barrier or something. So it rains over on one side, doesn't rain at all on the other side.
Yeah, because their rain numbers are actually like 17, 18 inches a year. That's not a lot, and so that's the Cascades, the effect of the Cascades protecting or preventing the rain. But I do get that. That's just a perception that's out there. It's mostly more Seattle, because Seattle gets like almost 40 inches of rain. Right. So maybe that's more Seattle than Spokane. But, I think I don't know. I'm really a fan. I do like the Pacific Northwest a lot.
It's beautiful.
I also like Portland a lot, too. I like Portland. I like Seattle. No, they're a little bigger. And so, there's kind of some appeal there. And the mountains are beautiful. But, this eastern part of the state. So good stuff. It's another school for our list. I think we're up to 85 if I'm counting right, but no, we'll have to check on that. We're getting there.
I think Gonzaga is a school that could go on a lot of people's lists based on what they're good at and what they offer.
I definitely do. And I think for some people, some of the Catholic ideology, it might be a bit too much for them, depending on how sensitive they are to that. That would be case by case. I mean, I do also work with a lot of students that say, as long as they're not trying to proselytize me, I'm okay with it. And there's others that will like the social justice and the service commitment. And I think to get the social justice and the service piece, they'll be okay with, some of the saints talk and Catholic theology and some of that. But that's the one thing that I would say to somebody looking at it, is just to see if they're going to be comfortable with that, because even if they don't make you go to mass, you're going to have to look at some Catholic theology and some of the core curriculum. And it's more in the context of an underpinning for why we do what we do, as opposed to we're trying to make you that way. Like, one thing I should say, they have a rabbi on campus, they have a Protestant minister on campus, so they really do. There's no religious test at all. There's no you're not Catholic, you're that like you're dinged in the admission. I mean, they really go to great lengths to not discriminate from my knowledge of it, at least.
Well, and I think so much of the Jesuit tradition, it's just like really incorporated into American ideology. I mean, and, like the Girl Scouts have a similar motto, I mean, so it's not that different from a lot of secular institutions' missions, in my opinion. So it feels comfortable.
I mean, I feel that way, but I've also had students go to Jesuit high schools and they're like, I can't do that again. Like, can't do that again. Like, so I'm just trying to be honest. Like, there's definitely going to be a person that is just going to feel like just a little too religious Catholic for them, and so that's just the one thing to check out. I feel like if you're okay with that box, it's great. I mean, most of their connections are in the Western U.S. as far as jobs. Like, I looked at where that makes sense, right? I looked at where their graduates go after, and this shouldn't surprise you, right? They go to Spokane, they go to Seattle, they go to San Francisco, they go to Portland, they go to Los Angeles, So, they're really tied in on the West Coast. And so that might be something, if somebody wants to be on the East or the Midwest or the South, that they might want to look at. But, for the most part, there's such a dearth of talent out there right now. And people are looking for talent anywhere they can get. There's national recruiters everywhere. I wouldn't let that get in my way at all.
Right.
But I think that's something that, people might want to talk to the Career Center to see what their placement's been like for people that know they might want to come back to the Midwest, the East, or the South or Southwest and just check that out. I personally don't have that concern. And I think, look, their name is, I look at Sports Powers as how their name is only going to grow too.
Yeah.
Like their name is only going to grow. Clemson's name is only going to grow because of there being such a powerhouse in sports and dominating. I mean, like I told you when we did the Clemson Spotlight, I've had more people ask me about Clemson in the last 2 years than in the previous 20.
Right.
And Gonzaga has come up a lot more from me. Like I'm talking about people asking me on their questionnaire when I say, what schools do you know you want to apply to? What schools are you thinking about? Like Gonzaga is getting on more lists than it ever got on before. And so I also look at it that way. I think they're just really positioned really well for a bright future. So I'm a definite thumbs up on this place. I love doing the spotlights. I don't always come across a school that I was where I feel like what you said, Lisa, like, can I sign up? Can I go? And for one to be that way and to not really be that diverse, that means it has to have everything else going for it. Because that's normally
boxes are checked.
Yeah, that's normally like a deal break, like certain deal breakers, and that's not one of them normally for me. But I said I'll make an exception for this one.
Well, you better watch out. They're probably going to send you an acceptance letter after hearing this glowing review.
Well, they deserved it. Awesome. All right. See you next week, Lisa.
All right. Bye.
Next week in the news, the mysterious disappearance of men. Where are the men on campus? Phil Cook and Glenn Sachs from glensachs.com. This is part 2 of our look at why women outnumber men at college campuses. Our question is actually bonus content. Mark and Lisa will discuss what you should be doing in the 12th grade. And this is part 4 of a 4-part series. In episode 175, Mark and Lisa discussed what you should be doing in middle school. In episode 180, it was the 9th and 10th grade. And in episode 185, it was what you should be doing in the 11th grade. So next week, it's what you should be doing when your child is in the 12th grade to prepare him or her for college. Our interview is part 3 of 3 with Eric Furda, the former executive director of undergraduate admissions for Columbia and the former dean of undergraduate admissions at the University of Pennsylvania. And it's a Q&A about applying to selective colleges. And our college spotlight comes to you from Buffalo, New York, and it is SUNY Buffalo.
Yeah, friends, and I can't wait to do this. There's 64 SUNY institutions, which is just an acronym for the State University of New York, SUNY. It's the largest comprehensive university system in the United States for all these public colleges in New York, and there are a lot of underrated gems in there. And it's our first time doing a spotlight. I know some people are a little salty. What about Binghamton, the flagship? Well, we'll bounce around and get to some of the other SUNYs, but SUNY Buffalo is a real underrated gem, and hopefully you'll tune in next week and listen to that as well. All right, my friend. We'll see you soon. Talk soon, my friend.
Take care, my friend. Next week.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe so you get every episode as soon as it is released. If you are interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on your favorite podcast listening app. I am the producer of the Your College Bound Kid podcast. We have a fantastic team of 9 people. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. David Williams and Dr. Lisa Rouff. Our sound engineer who fixes all of our many errors is Nemanja Modfich. The amazing music you hear is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Boss. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Dalianas Dimitri. If you want to have a college coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want to ask, or a college you want Lisa or me to do a spotlight on, or if you have a recommended resource or an article you think we should share, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you, our family, next week.